Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of the Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 15th of May. So coming to the first article, facing the climate emergency. Now basically this term climate emergency is what is a lot in news because several European nations are considering to declare an emergency vis-a-vis the climate, and UK, the Parliament of UK has already declared it. So that is the entire context of this particular editorial. Now this editorial is highly important for the environment section in UPSC means because it has many areas which have been touched. So whenever an article is one which discusses about several aspects, so that article automatically becomes important because your answers are also expected to touch upon several aspects. So that is why these editorials are very important for us. Now coming to the first issue that has been discussed. Now an analysis is what has been drawn here between climate change and economy. Now here several other articles also in the past we have discussed on environment, and all of these articles highlight that climate change has an economic cost also, and yet again this article is highlighting that it is based on the studies or the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the US, which has said that the GDP of poorer countries is what is impacted because of climate change. What is happening is that rich countries are getting more richer and the poorer countries are getting more poorer because the cost of climate change is what is highly burdened on the poorer nations. So that is one analysis that has been drawn. And if we take it in specific to India, in that case it has been analyzed that India's GDP penalty because of climate change is to the tune of 31%. And this is in the year between a time span of 1961 to the year 2010. So this is one data that you can keep as a record with you. Now next issue that has been discussed is with regards to the biodiversity. Now the editorial is discussing that because of climate change, there is a huge amount of stress that is there on the biodiversity. According to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, the abundance of species on the planet is what has reduced by approximately 115 as compared to what it was in the past in the pre-industrial era. Also, what is important here is that about 1 million species are what are under threat. 85% of the wetlands are what have been destroyed because of climate change. So these are some figures that sometimes come handy in answers. You should keep a record of these kind of figures. Even if you don't want to keep specifically these ones, you can select some other piece of facts, and those facts you should try and utilize them in your paper. So that is how you have to go about these facts. The next issue is with regards to the political focus. Now definitely all over the globe it is being seen that the political focus is what is not there on climate change. Even in the case of India, if you will see, despite the fact that a climate emergency is what a scenario of climate emergency is what is existing, there was no cabinet meeting that was ever called for discussing this kind of an emergency. Also that the elections are there in India. At this point of time, there has hardly been any debate by political leaders on what they will do to curb climate change. There's hardly a mention of climate talks or a debate on this issue. So that is what is being highlighted here, that the deficiency of political focus is a major cause of concern vis-a-vis climate change. The next issue that is important here is with regards to the collusion. Now the editorial is saying that there are cases of collusion which is existing between the government plus the capitalists. Now the government is colluding with the capitalists so that fossil fuel is what is continuing, especially companies that are working on fossil fuels and other fossil fuel based companies are colluding with the government so that that bans, or for that matter some fines on usage of fossil fuel is what is not ensured, and the reduction of fossil fuels is what does not take place. So this is one thing that is causing climate change, and this is what needs to be checked. So that is one analysis. The next issue that has been discussed here is an important one. This is with regards to the fossil fuel subsidies. Now this is what the IMF has highlighted. It has said that fossil fuel subsidies are what are given by several countries, and in the year 2017 these subsidies were to the tune of $5.2 trillion. So this was the huge amount of fossil fuel subsidy that has been given, and as a result of this it is important that these subsidies be done away with. Instead, if this subsidy would not have been given, then climate change, or for that matter the carbon emission that is impacting climate change, would have been reduced by 28%. So this is one analysis which becomes important for us, that these subsidies are what need to be done away with. Rather, penalty on the usage of fossil fuel is what should be charged from people who are consuming more and more fossil fuel. You should know that it is the developed countries that are using fossil fuels much more than the developing countries, and as a result of which the richer countries should pay for polluting the globe, but that is clearly not happening. So that is one analysis that is important. Next, the editorial is discussing about the Arctic. Now, in the Arctic also the glaciers are melting. But despite the fact that these glaciers are melting, there should have been concern, there should have been conservation of this particular region. But rather what has happened is that large part of the glaciers now having melted in Arctic, this area is now being explored. It is being further opened up for exploitation of resources in this area, which might further result in damaging the climate in this particular region. So that is another analysis vis-a-vis Arctic. Next, you should know about Mozambique. In this country, Mozambique, there were two cyclones. One was Idai and the second was Kenneth. Now, these kind of examples are sometimes handy. If there is an opportunity, then you can use these kind of examples in your answers. It gives a deeper knowledge. So, as a result of which, it gives a good impression also. Now, in this particular country, these two cyclones are what have hit primarily because of climate change, and there is a huge amount of distress that has taken place. Also, there are cases of corruption that are emerging in Mozambique vis-a-vis exploration of the natural gas or the oil resources that are there in this particular country. So that is another cause that has been discussed here, that climate change as well as this policies of the capitalists and the governments today are what are corrupt. So this entire scenario is that of a vicious circle. So that is what has been discussed here. Next is the issue of the central attention. Now the editorial is calling for a central attention that is warranted, but the problem is that this is what is not given, rather misinformation is what is created. What is at present happening is that there is funding that is done for creating misinformation that the climate change is not a real threat. Of such kind of wrong knowledge is what is being imparted to the citizens. So that is one analysis. Next is the issue of a planet emergency. This is also a key phrase that you can use, that the scenario of climate change all across the world is such that a planet emergency is what needs to be declared globally. So that is another thing that is important. Next, what is important is that despite the fact that the government is not focusing on, the governments across the countries is not focusing on climate change, what is important is that there is a rise in the people's movement. For example, children are raising their voices. Several other groups are raising their voices, and these are the movements which can actually bring a change, is what this particular editorial is highlighting, that the people's movement can bring a spark of hope. So that is one gist. Next, what has been discussed here is with regards to a major overhaul. The editorial is discussing that for curbing climate change, small steps are what are not going to be efficient now. The degree to which the damage has been done, for that to be rectified, a major overhaul is what is required in the lifestyles and the behaviors of the people, so that, and especially in the patterns of consumption, so that climate change is what can be reversed. So that is what has been discussed here. This is one of the most important editorials. I would suggest that you keep a record of all of these points. All our PDFs are available on our Telegram channel, so please refer for our PDFs to our channel. The link for the same will be given in the description box. So that's about this particular article. Coming to the next article, missing demand. The context here is with regards to the demand in the economy that is falling. This article is again a seasonal article. I have always said for these articles are not important per se, because this is a trend that will change automatically, but some degree of this trend is what you can refer as an example in your answers. Otherwise, a direct question on these kind of issues is what will not be expected in UPSC. Now, coming to the issues that have been discussed, the first issue is with regards to the sales of cars and commercial vehicles. This is what has gone down severely, almost by 16% of the total automobile industry sales are what have been impacted, which is reflecting that there is a fall in the demand. Now, another concept that is important is the concept of fair proxy. Here you have to understand that cars and automobiles are one of the biggest indicators of the health of an economy. Whenever an economy is performing well, first and foremost, one should check the automobile sector. If the automobile sector has picked up, then that means the economy has picked up. But if the automobile sector is what is facing distress, then this is what is a clear reflection of the distress in economy. So automobile sector is largely a fair proxy to the entire economy. So that is what you have to understand. Another word that I had picked up is the demand drought. Now this is another way to explain that there's a scarcity in demand. So that is why I just picked it up, because this was a key phrase. Next is the issue of manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector in India is what is not performing. The index of industrial production is revealing that, and the manufacturing sector is what has always been one of the weakest links in India's economy, and this is what the government needs to focus on. This is what needs to be revived. Next analysis is with regards to the external sector. Now in the external sector, because of the tensions in West Asia and also because of the sanctions that Iran is facing, there is a probability of rise in oil imports, which might further stress the economy, is what has been discussed in this editorial. Next is the issue of farm distress. This again is a reality in India, which is further which is further weakening the economy, which is not in economy's interest. These are some points which have been discussed. These are the recent trends which you should know about, have an idea about. So that's about this particular article. Come to the next article, implementation issues in 10% reservation. Now basically this is with regards to the 10% reservation that has been given to the economically weaker sections in the general category itself. Now this article is talking about a lot of nitty-gritties, and I don't expect UPSC to ever ask such a question. The only idea that you have to draw from this article is that implementation is a major challenge for this plan or this particular scheme of the government. But still, for those of you who are interested, I'll just explain so that it's not difficult for you to if you read this particular article. The issue here is that whenever a reservation is given, for example, the reservations are given for SCs, then in this case what happens is that suppose 10 seats are what are reserved for the SCs and 100 seats are what are there for the general category. So if in the SCs there are 20 candidates who have crossed the cutoff limit, in that case what happens that the top 10 candidates will take the seats from the general category and the remaining 10 will get the seats from the SC category. But what happens is that if these seats are suppose not for the same service, for example in the case of IAS, if out of these 100 seats, 50 seats are what are there for IAS and the rest are 50 seats are for IPS, say for instance, then it might happen that these 10 candidates from the SC category, some of those candidates might be getting an IPS seat under the general category score. So obviously they would not want to take this the seat of the IPS, and they would want to be taking the seat of IS, for instance. So in that case they will go back to their category and they will say that I want a seat as per my category in the reserved category and not in the unreserved category. So in that scenario what happens is that the seat that is going to be vacated by this one person who is not going to accept a seat in the unreserved category is what is going to go to the general category candidate again, or to the unreserved category candidate again. So this will result in a scenario that in the general category candidates or the unreserved seats will go at a lower cutoff as compared to the reserved seats. So the entire idea behind reservation is what is going to be defeated, because in reservation what is aimed is that a lower cutoff is what is provided for the weaker sections or the discriminated sections, and a reverse is what will be happening here. So this is what has been discussed vis-a-vis the economically weaker section, because what is happening is that 90% of India's population can come under the economically weaker section, and in this context the editorial is discussing that if this is the policy that is being used for the economically weaker section, there are a large number of students who will be qualifying under the economically weaker section will not be willing to take their unreserved seats, and they will be willing to come in the reserved seats, and it might result in a scenario where the cutoff for the economically weaker section will be higher than the unreserved category. So that is the challenge in implementation of this particular policy. So that is the gist of this article. I doubt if such kind of a technical aspect is what UPSC will ask, but still for understanding purposes, that this is the entire explanation of this, and that's the entire discussion that is relevant for us about this particular article. So that's about today's video. Before we end, I would request you all to kindly share our videos with your friends and all those of them whom you know, so that we are encouraged to make more and more videos. So on that note, I end my discussion today. I thank you all for watching.